Ladies and gentlemen, how are you doing? Welcome to another episode of Scramble. On this episode of Scramble, I'm going to particularly parse through the question that is facing the Indian population today, which is the Modi government actually anti-Muslim? The purpose behind this podcast for me has been that I've observed that there is a very great divide between the media trials and the legal trials in India. The public finds it very hard to navigate around the two. Media trials are short, quick, distortive, and unsubstantiated. And even though the judiciary in India is largely independent and the higher judiciary considerably away from corruption, legal trials are dragged, long drawn, prone to pre-proceeding and procedural vulnerabilities like evidence tampering and the need for substance beyond the element of doubt and so on. The great ever-growing difference is that of most likely suspect but not ruled by the judiciary in view of insufficient evidence, and most likely innocent but distorted by media for sensationalism. My number one attempt is to parse through that quite systematically to evaluate whether the Modi government is in fact Muslim hate encouraging or not. Now, there's a certain few things to remember in that process. Here, I don't take into consideration the Hindu-Muslim pro-BJP, anti-BJP sentiment at all. Emotion is more malleable and more prone to manipulation than reason is. In fact, perception is cognition plus bias. I'm going to evaluate facts and instances, placing them in the backdrop of their context and pretext, and try to answer if in fact the charge is accurate or not. 2. Media sensationalism and media bias is a very real phenomenon. As for the reasons of the two, wait for another podcast. Likewise, the tampering of the judicial and investigative process is a real phenomenon. I will leave that to the expertise of a legal scholar to break down. Any of my listeners are welcome to contribute. I will host you on this show if you do a good job of breaking down the vulnerabilities of the investigative or judicial processes in India. 3. This is an opinion piece. However, I've tried to not let bias sink in here, but it may show. Frankly, I don't care. You're going to label me anyway, so I can only stand by my integrity. All I'm going to say is that I researched for days on this data, maneuvering around hours of cognitive dissonance and overt contradictions to make sense of all of this. All my sources will be in the description except for the ones that are easily found on Google or reported across mainstream media sources. 4th, my attempt is to ease the process of thinking for you. I do all the hard work and you are left with only one task, an honest inquiry to ask yourself if you have preconceptions that color your notions. In the process of compiling my data, I have limited my analysis to the 2014 to 19 era of the Modi government. Apart from that, I have used data that I found trustable. This data is mostly independent, either from the judiciary or the government records. However, in the post-truth era, the veracity of the data is always in contest. So I have tried to accumulate data from other independent media sources as well. I have limited myself to actual speeches and remarks from video footage and not from how the media reported them. If at all your claim is that the data from government bodies is fudged, even after listening to the full extent of my analysis, you have the door open to contact me and send me contradictory data. My Facebook is Prakhar Gupta and my IG is PRVKHVR. I flipped the V's into A's. My email is mailme.prakhargupta@gmail.com. However, if you're going to make a claim that the government controls the data from, say, the Ministry of Home Affairs, then I think by proper application of logic, it is your onus to prove your allegation. I have faith in the institution of democracy, or at least have moved with the assumption that the democratic checks and balances are largely in place. Finally, I know most of you have either already or will find my views as biased and right-leaning. Frankly, again, I don't care. In a regular case, I wouldn't even make a case. But let me just drop one point here that might instantiate a particular left-leaning bias that I will take throughout. I call this the test of implicit responsibility. And I'm going to try and hold BJP to that implicit responsibility wherever the news is stable. What I mean by that is that any and all right-wing governments, because they often operate on socially majoritarian lines, are supposed to be more than careful in issuing remarks, frivolous, direct, or otherwise that might alienate the minorities. To that effect, they must go one step further than the left counterparts to ensure that their communication does not cause even implicit alienation leading to social disharmony. So even where causal inference cannot be drawn between the effect and BJP's involvement, the choice to ignore the same or even allow the same is seen as impermissible in my view. So to go through the data, I went quite in segments. I started off with the theoretical components of the whole thing and moved on to what the public perceives is the philosophy behind the entire part. and then from there what the practices are. So and particularly with practices, I parse through data on communal violence, I parse through data on frivolous comments and rhetoric, and finally through the data on policy. So to begin the entire analysis, let's start with the theoretical component. And before we start with the theoretical component of BJP, let's start with the theoretical component of the RSS, which is the parent socio-cultural body of BJP. So these are a few quotes I borrowed directly from RSS's website. These are not quotes that are hidden in small print or any of that. These are quotes just right there on an R philosophy page of RSS. The first quote is, "When British left, the population was at a risk of being more disintegrated, posing a direct threat of separatism and violent implosion." Dr. Hedgewar said often, even if the British leave under the Hindus, unless the Hindus are organized as a powerful nation, where is the guarantee that we shall be able to protect our freedom? The second quote, "Anyone who is the national of this country, irrespective of being a Shaiv, Shakt, Vaishnav, Sikh, Jain, Muslim, Christian, Parsi, Buddhist, or Jew by way of their creed or mode of worship is a Hindu. As Justice M.C. Chagla has forcefully put it, the French, with their sense of logic and precision, call Indians, irrespective of their caste or community, les Hindus. I think that is a correct description of all those who live in this country and consider it their home. In the true sense, we are all Hindus, although we may practice different religions. I am a Hindu because I trace my ancestry to my Aryan forefathers and I cherish the philosophy and the culture which they handed down to successive generations." The third quote is, "If only we accept this proposition and call ourselves Hindu by race, it would be the greatest triumph for secularism." Now, the theoretical philosophical part of BJP, I borrowed another quote from BJP's website, and it reads as follows. "Secularism, a leitmotif of Indian politics, has been distorted beyond recognition. Secularism had emerged in the West as a reaction to clash between papal control of politics. It talks of separation of the state and the church. In India, neither was there ever a theocracy, nor it can be in the future. Indian culture is a culture of equal respect for all religions. It can be translated as Sarva Panth Sambhav or Panth Nirapeksha. Unfortunately, in India, secularism has been reduced to minority appeasement, that too at the cost of the majority. This is what Sri Lal Krishna Advani calls pseudo-secularism. When we say Ram Rajya or Dharm Rajya, we mean an ethical governance based on rule of law of constitution. It is not linked to any faith or way of worship." However, the next logical question would be, even if BJP and RSS purport their ideas to be of this nature, do people really perceive it as such? So to figure that out, I Googled a bunch, I looked around a bunch, but I found an article by the Huffington Post where they compile and analyze data from Organizer, which is RSS's mouthpiece. Now, Organizer ran a survey asking people if they saw the definition of Hindutva and Hindu in the same sense as RSS and BJP intended to be, or whether they see it in the sense where Hindu is particularly a religion. Hindutva means a Hindu religion-based oriented majority, right? So there is a roughly 50-50 divide when it comes to whether people see the term Hindu used in context of Hindutva to be inclusive of other religions. Roughly 50% do see it in the same sense as RSS and BJP intended to be, 47% don't, and 2% say they don't know. This seems to suggest that either people who see the integration are blinded by self-serving bias, or the people who see the Hindu in Hindutva to mean only Hindus as a religious group are misled by many media sources that have tried to illuminate a difference. However, one might say that the practices of the RSS and BJP suggest that they say something and they do something else, thus media illuminates that difference. Let us now examine that claim. To figure out the practice, there's a particular thing that I want you to note. India is an extremely diverse country and has often and consistently been a Pandora's box of communal and other hate crimes. The phenomena is not new. However, the media salience could be new due to a variety of factors such as social media availability, abundant fake news, and mainstream media sensationalism. Likewise, there could be an actual surge of instances too, and the blame on media could be less substantial as some might claim. The first metric I took to analyze the practice element of the BJP Modi government being anti-Muslim or not is the cases of communal violence. So between 2004 and 17, which includes the INC-led UPA's first term, the second term, and then the Modi government's term between 2014 and 17, an average of 742 communal violent instances occurred in a year. An average of 771 in UPA's first term between 2004 and 2008, an average of 724 between UPA's second term in 2009 and 2013, and then an average of 720 in BJP's term from 2014 to 2017. As such, there is no statistical difference. Statistical difference is about 3%, and that too in a pro-BJP direction. Yet still, the difference is deemed insignificant. However, and this is a big however, there is some disagreement between the data provided in the RTI by the MHA, which is the Ministry of Home Affairs and its Human Rights Department, and the data found with the NCRB, which is the National Crime Record Bureau, which is also a subsidiary of the Ministry of Home Affairs, right? The most stark has been to the effect of the number of communal violent cases in 2014, where the RTI responded by the Human Resource Department of the Ministry of Home Affairs reports 644 instances, while the National Crime Record Bureau says it's almost double at 1227. Factly.in, a data-driven portal, broke the news about such difference in 2015. Now, this difference could be attributed to one of two things. Either the method of data collection. While the Ministry of Home Affairs takes into account data gathered from State Police and Intelligence Bureau, the NCRB compiles incidents on the basis of FIRs registered by the State Police. The other, as Factly.in resonates, could be blamed at the behest of malpractice on the government, police and intelligence's end. However, there are a few interesting things to note here. FIRs are first information reports only. They are considered as only prima facie reason to investigate, which often enough leads to inconclusive instances of criminality. 2, there could be a rampant paranoia at the instance of a right-wing party getting in government, which could have inflated the figure by means of a misattribution of any criminal activity to have religious undertones. Third, and the most interesting, the figures of victims in the communal cases in the year 2014 from both ends are roughly the same, that is 2000. That makes me question if there is, after all, government malpractice or just a difference in data collection metrics. Finally, the National Crime Records Bureau counts hate speech in their figures for communal violent crimes, while the MHA reserves itself to physical instances of violence. A more descriptive picture can be painted by studying the trend of injuries and fatalities in these communal violent cases. So, as for communal deaths between 2014 and 17, a total of 390 deaths reported in the 4-year period, which is an average of 97.5 deaths a year. Between 2004 and 13, a total of 1,216 total deaths were reported on the same measure, an average of 121.6 deaths a year. The trend suggests a 20% or a fifth of a decrease in favor of the Modi government. As for communal injuries, in the UPA 1 and 2 10-year block between 2004 and 13, an average of 2,183 injuries a year. In the average in the 2004 to 2014 to 17 block of the Modi government, an average of 2,222 people injured on the same metric. The statistical difference, an increase in the Modi regime, a pro-Congress-led UPA figure, is 2%. It is considered non-significant in statistical computation. However, these are cases of communal violence en masse. There is no data available, at least to a complete or comparable nature, to do the math with respect to the direction and victims of such violence. Whether more Muslims were hurt, or more Hindus were killed, or more Christians is unidentifiable except for isolated reports. Now, there is some statistical research on the BJP variable. Anirban Mitra, a professor of economics at the University of Kent, and Debaraj Ray, a professor of economics at NYU, have an econometric research that sheds light on the statistical relationship between BJP candidates on a constituent seat and communal violence. The relevant portions from Mitra and Ray 2018 paper reads as follows. Here we briefly discuss the role the presence of the BJP has had on the communal violence. The careful reader would have noticed that in each of the regressions in our tables, table 1 to 4, we have used BJP's shares of Lok Sabha seats as a regressor. The coefficient on the variable is positive throughout. However, it is statistically significant only in some of the regressions, particularly in the sample without Ahmedabad and when restricted to urban households and conflict. This might suggest that the role of BJP vis-a-vis religious conflict is limited to urban areas. To break that down in a simpler fashion, what that essentially means is they took the independent variable, the independent X variable, to be the number of the percentage, let's just say the percentage of BJP seats in the Lok Sabha in a particular time, right? And what is dependent upon that, the Y variable, is the number of communally violent cases or conflicts during that time. So if they increase the X variable by 1%, how much does the Y variable go up and down by? That is how a regression analysis usually takes place. And what they found essentially is that with increase in the number of BJP seats, there is increase only in urban areas where conflict pre-existed, excluding Ahmedabad. What is pertinent to note with all this data is that in the last census survey of India in 2011, it was found that only 30% of the population of India lives in urban India. 70% still lives in rural India. That was all in terms of the statistical analysis of communally violent cases. Now let's move on to the comments part of the whole thing, right? So there is a lot of hoo around comments from BJP leaders, and I decided to look at them quite systematically. Right, things to note. If you think all right-wing ideas are immoral or beneath you, this is the point you should stop listening to this. I have enough instances of people who were clearly anti-Muslim in their rhetoric, and enough instances that were misconstrued. However, if you feel that all right-wing ideas are bad and terrible, then I have news for you. You do not understand the nuance of politics and have probably been shy of exploring the conservative set of ideas for the sake of your confirmation bias. I am not going to discuss the validity of each idea as it appears, only the factual veracity of it. The basis of these ideas, if it falls within the general playing field of right-wing conservative ideas in sync with the rest of the world or with the RSS and BJP's mission statements, I give them a pass. 2, I am factoring in the construction of my opinion the implicit responsibility of the right-wing government. The responsibility is owed to the nature of the beast itself, because the existence of a right-wing government, or at least this one, brings a sense of communal paranoia in people. It must go an extra distance at maintaining the peace in the now sensitive religious fault lines. A lack of rebuking, discouragement, or any rhetoric, even if it is not apparently violent or violence encouraging, but serves to encourage any kind of Hindu-Muslim divide, has been counted as an instance of implicit guilt in my view. Right. I used a dataset provided by the wire.in of 12 instances of overt hate speech by BJP leaders. 4 were outright dismissible because they either had pro-Hindu remarks, which does not necessarily translate into anti-Muslim, or had remarks against Kashmiris, which is again not remarks against Muslims, or well, Mayawati. Out of the remaining 8, 1, Vikram Saini's comments at a Muzaffarnagar rally in 2018 that was labeled by the media as provocative because he said our country is called Hindustan, meaning it is a nation of Hindus, is very in sync with the RSS's definition of Hindus that explicitly includes all other religions. The context also is very morally stable, where he speaks of inclusive growth and being against religion-based discrimination. This is dismissible on the grounds of media's purposeful or unpurposeful misinterpretation. Of the remaining 7, 4, Mahesh Sharma's comments on APJ Abdul Kalam being nationalistic despite being a Muslim from 2015, Anand Kumar Hegade's gross conflation of Islam and terrorism in his comments from 2016, and Shobha Karanjale's casually using the term jihadi to refer even possibly to the Muslim population in Karnataka are all seen as inappropriate and guilty of either alienation or encouraging the conflict against Muslims. Anupriya Patel mentioned how there were Hindu traitors, the existence of whom had resulted in 100 crore Hindus being scared of 20 crore Muslims, is a case found to be guilty. To demarcate the divide so emphatically and pit them against each other in that fashion is unacceptably alienating and tension inciting, especially when the supposed definition of Hindu as per her parent body is inclusive. Of the remaining 3, Giriraj Singh's remark on India's population explosion being because of Islamic freedom of polygamy is wrong on multiple levels. 1, it isolates a community, at that a minority, and blames them for the friction in growth on an entire nation. And 2, because it is factually incorrect. Muslim population in India grew roughly by 25% between 2001 and 2011. Hindu population grew by 17%. The metric might indicate that the Muslim population grew by 1.5 times the Hindu population, but absolute numbers reflect differently. Muslim population grew by 33.7 million, I think it's 3.37 crore, between 2001 and 2011, but the Hindu population grew by 138.7 million or 13.87 crore over the same time, a 4-fold increase over the Muslim population. This remark clearly instigates sensitive religious fault lines and can be seen as implicitly encouraging of Muslim-directed hate. The Yogi Adityanath case from 2007 is a highly confusing and scary story. After thorough investigation, CBI wanted to prosecute him for his anti-Muslim riot-causing enmity-promoting speech. The state government in 2017, then and now headed by him, overturned the demand for prosecution. This is wholly suspicious, moving along the lines of making only obvious assumptions. Allahabad High Court aligned itself with the state government, and as much as I trust the independence of the judiciary in India, it would seem highly probable that they were limited in their reach due to factors beyond their control. That is like cases of evidence tampering and so on. Verdict, likely a case of outrageous hate-inciting speech. Senior BJP lawmaker Vinay Katiyar is guilty too. His remarks that any and all Muslims in India must go to Pakistan or Bangladesh is entirely alienating and hate-encouraging. Of an otherwise 113 instances listed by NDTV as cases of hate speech by BJP ranging from Modi, Shah, Fadnavis and Subramaniam Swamy, some are cases of petty remarks common to recent politics in India and even for that matter America that are not indicative of religious alienation. Some are misconstrued by ignoring the context and pretext, and some are valid cases of hate speech inciting unrest, disseminating misinformation or inducing violence against Muslims. Other noteworthy mentions in the comment section. By the way, this has been a long list. Okay, Menka Gandhi's infamous remark to the effect of democracy being a give-take relationship when pointing towards Muslim voters is bad philosophy of governance and absolute assault on the ideal principles of democracy. She started off by building the case for why Muslim voters, contrary to her party's anti-Muslim perception, must vote for her by mentioning what she has done for them. She then goes on to create a transactionality and by means of it communicate a displeasure and or a predictive disinterest in working for Muslims who don't vote for her. Focusing on these remarks and even making the grossly unfounded assumption that she does not possess any discriminatory Hindu favoring sentiment, this comment can be taken to have nothing less than a coercive and alienating effect. Verdict definitely rumbles the religious fault lines. Sakshi Maharaj. Various media outlets reported Sakshi Maharaj, a sitting MP from Unnao and a former ascetic, to threaten to curse people who did not vote for him. This became the cause of turmoil with the intellectual elite for two reasons. One, they construe it as a threat. Two, it is apparently dubious in logic and primarily stems from religious rhetoric. To respond to one, the news media outlets were very friendly in using the term threatens or will, which in the clickbait culture is enough to shape perception. Listening to the video and reading the transcript of that comment, Sakshi Maharaj issues, at the very best, a veiled threat to curse people. He speaks in passive voice, trying to create a voter motivation based on his identity to people already present at his rally and not the public at large. He says, I'm an ascetic, I'm a sannyasi. And within the scriptures, it is said that if you do not give a pleading sannyasi alms, he takes with him the good karma of the household and leaves behind the bad karma. It does not seem obvious how he actively threatens voters, but passes a religious remark of the nature of might happen, an effect possible to the same degree as reincarnation, 72 virgins, or the heaven promised by Christ, bearing no logical consequence. The use of religious or scriptural logic at best could be construed as stupid, but in no way seems to indicate an active threatening. Clearly, this sounds more like media manipulation. The Sakshi Maharaj remark on the 2024 elections. Sakshi Maharaj was reported in many clickbait titles as saying that there would be no more elections in 2024 after this one. This was seen as an open threat to the process of democracy. A sitting MP, an active campaigner, a person worth a microphone predicting that there shall be no election in 2024? To take that comment seriously, especially in the light of the global political narrative, is most likely a case of attributing meaning due to paranoid fear psychosis. Of course, India cannot just amend its constitution to go back on democracy. I mean, I don't even think that it would take amending the constitution, but scrapping it or taking control of India by militant means to do something like that. Again, stupid, but not hate inciting. He was also misquoted as saying that the Hindus have awakened, whereas what he says in that video is that the country has awakened, Hindus have awakened, and people have awakened. Again, a term Hindu used in the context of the country and on the pretext of the RSS-BJP construction of the term. The selective handpicking of the comments by media distorts the picture more than necessary. On reading the transcript, it is apparent that Sakshi Maharaj's statement are limited to hollow stupidity at worst and have little or nothing to do with religious hatred or specific religious incitement. Also, for the latter, he apologized when he was reprimanded. Verdict: doesn't seem to incite hate, but makes very hollow, dismissible remarks based out of religious logic, a phenomena common to politics in India. Pragya Thakur. Wow, okay, Pragya Thakur. 1. As for her comments on Godse being a nationalistic hero to be revered, without going into the detail of Godse's intent for murder and so on, I'm happy to move with the pro-Gandhi view and call Godse nothing short of a traitor. Pragya Thakur's comment were later isolated by the party, saying that is not the view of the party as a whole, and 2, by Modi when he says that he cannot forgive Pragya Thakur of the same. Along this, we must contend with the Hindu Mahasabha's reenactment of Gandhi's assassination and the celebration of his assassin Godse on Gandhi's death anniversary. It is pertinent to note that the BJP and RSS have overtly distanced themselves from Hindu Mahasabha for this now and before. Pragya Thakur's comment on Hemant Karkare and the Malegaon blast case. The courts are in the process of figuring out whether Pragya Thakur was involved with the Malegaon blasts. The court's decisions have been very contradictory and have too much movement to address here. It is best to leave something as complicated as this to the behest of the courts. However, the NIA court does find a prima facie reason for conviction and thus has charged her under various laws for unlawful activities. Now, Assuming that she suffered mental and physical torture in the prisons due to what could possibly be a false accusation, she was definitely in the wrong to derogate a martyr, Hemant Karkare. Thirdly, BJP giving her a ticket to contest elections, given the seriousness of the charge, is not an ideal move for redemption of her character at all, because it comes at the cost of enough moral quandaries as far as the democracy is concerned, and two, because it gives an alienating message to the people. There were better ways to redeem her. Discourse would be sufficient. Allowing her an electoral role is blindsiding the court's proceeding, at least on a moral, social, and philosophical level, if not on a legal level. The BJP distanced itself from these remarks too, but again, it seems more damage control in view of the fact that they continue to support her electoral claim. Amit Shah and the comments about NRC. Amit Shah, in a speech given in Assam, promised that all refugees who are seeking asylum on the grounds of religious persecution in their home country, be that Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, or Tibet, who are essentially Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, and so on, will be given citizenship. Note that Bangladesh and Pakistan are Muslim majority nations, and the religious minorities seeking refuge are usually Hindu, Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, and so on. He promises citizenship to religiously persecuted minorities that are seeking or are refugee status in India. Every other infiltrator who comes for any other reason but religious persecution from these areas will be removed. This is in sync with the national security agenda. Deporting illegal immigrants on the ground of national security is a classic right-wing policy, and any contest to its validity on the scale of morality is a very, very nuanced discussion. Now, before I lay the exaggeration at the behest of the media, it is safe to say that BJP's Twitter handle committed a faux pas in communicating this message. This faux pas may be read as intentionally alienating the Muslims too. However, the speech in context is not anti-Muslim. As far as the policies are concerned, which is, by the way, a very nuanced discussion, there is three policies that I'm going to be talking about. The first one is triple talaq. Now, triple talaq is a very complicated issue by itself. Talaq-e-biddat, the utterance of the word talaq thrice, allowed a Muslim man to divorce his wife instantly. The Supreme Court had ruled this method as invalid grounds for divorce in 2017. However, in 2018, the government tried to introduce a ban and a punishment by means of a law on the same. From being merely invalid, it is now moving towards achieving a criminal status, a law able to further the notion through non-bailable arrests and so on by means of legal tools of discouragement. Apparently, it could be read as a sign of progressivism or minority targeting, depending on how you see it. However, the latter makes little sense to me. The criticism of the opposition is entirely discounting that the triple talaq is banned in many Islamic countries too, probably a finding that invalidation does not discourage the population enough to have that effect. In insulated areas, it is very easy to validate what is invalid through cultural norms. However, the prospective punishment empowers Muslim women to approach the courts and the police, extending their powers beyond the limitation of insulated cultural dictates. This law, in light of the contemporary movement in other Islamic countries to adapt to the modern narrative of progression and equality, is to be seen as pro-Islam. Any misconstruction of the opposition, activists, or media's part is dangerous and can qualify for the same implicit guilt of further sensitizing religious fault lines during a right-wing regime. As for the analogical charges of abandoning of wives by husbands of all religions being an omnipresent phenomenon regardless, this is a separate and quite distinct notion from instantiating an unequivocal and instant talaq at the pleasure of the husband. Hajj subsidy. Number 2. Now, the removal of the Hajj subsidy can apparently be construed as an anti-Muslim move. However, a few facts are in order. Number 1, this came a day after the ban on women being able to do the Hajj without a mehram, a male guardian that they cannot marry, was lifted by the BJP. Apart from that, Muslim women who were entirely dependent on males first and then the lottery system of permission second were given special exemption from the lottery system too. In the light of the same analysis from point 1 about triple talaq, this fact is in fact progressive. Fact 2. The likes of Asauddin Owaisi, the prominent leader of the Muslim faction representing party AIMIM, said that he has been in favor of the removal of the Hajj subsidy for a while. A Muslim judge, Justice Aftab Alam, in a 2-member Supreme Court bench, passed an interim order asking the government to phase out the subsidy in 2012, which was left unattended to until 2014 by the INC-led UPA government and was followed after by the NDA in the post-2014 era. The grounds of the order were not on the principle of state subsidy, but because it was against religious tenets. Justice Aftab Alam quoted the Quran to say that it enjoined upon all Muslims to use their own money for Hajj after taking care of dependents and paying off of one's own debts. Reductively, the Holy Quran says that the Hajj is to be taken on with one's own funds. All India Muslim Personal Law Board's Kamal Farooqi welcomed the move, saying that a wrong impression was being created that Muslims were gaining from the government aid. He resonates the view held by the government and their math that such subsidy in fact went to the airline carrier Air India and not the individuals going to the Hajj. Fourth, the money is to be used on other minority projects in sync with the Supreme Court order, and the government claims that it is to be used now for the promotion of minority education, especially the girl child, which is a phenomena that has haunted Indian population for a while now. Fifth, the government has set up a committee not just to depose the Hajj subsidy, but to come up with a new Hajj policy between 2018 and 2022. The link for the summary of the recommendations of this reformation is attached below. In very short, there are two quick conclusions I have. One, it seems to suggest that the BJP's inclusive growth idea is being held, at least in principle. And two, that the charge against the secular politics of the opposition being of the nature of appeasement is more substantive than what might seem. The beef ban. Now, there's a certain few things to dissect with respect to the claim that the beef ban is a tool to alienate Muslims. Firstly, even in its most inaccurate construction, it is at best a Hindu-favoring enactment, which does not necessitate an anti-Muslim intent, much like the holiday for Easter would not mean that the Buddhists are violated. Secondly, it is not a beef ban and not a case of dietary profiling like the media has conflated it to be. The ban on beef, if at all in any places, is consequential, but the ban in law is on cow slaughter, not consuming beef. Again, as a consequence in some places, beef consumption has become prohibited, but it is not a beef ban in its true literal sense. Thirdly, it is not a case of cultural imperialism, as my very English savvy friends might want to call it. It is provided directly for in the directive principle of state policy article 48 in the Constitution of India. It says, the state shall organize agriculture and animal husbandry on modern and scientific lines and shall, in particular, take steps for preserving and improving the breeds, prohibiting the slaughter of cows and calves and other milch and draught cattle. The cause is noted in the commentary of the Constituent Assembly as supposed to be scientific, modern, and economical. The religious reasons were left out from the framing, but the directive policy was put in suggestion. The directive policy, the directive policy suggestion was put in place regardless. This directive policy not only leaves the door open for the states to do it, but also encourages them to do it. For reference, you can check the debate and commentary from the Constituent Assembly on this issue dated November 24, 1948. If you make the case that this law is being implemented for religious reasons regardless, you must be informed that the Supreme Court, over several decisions, has ruled in favor of a ban on cow slaughter being constitutional. The final verdict came from a 7-member constitutional bench in the Mirzapur Moti Qureshi Kasab judgment. This is a very complex question, and therefore I align myself with India's premier intellectual body, the Supreme Court, and at that, the constitutional bench of the Supreme Court in that. Fourth, these laws are a matter of stateless, that is, states make laws on this. Cow slaughter bans have existed in states in India as early as 1950s. And even then, a lot of states with other governments have enacted, upheld, not revoked, or not even mentioned to revoke this law. This goes on to say that this isn't entirely a BJP or Modi phenomena, even though they may push for it more heavily. Now, 20 out of 29 states regulate, in some form or degree, cow slaughter. These forms and degrees vary to the effect of where in some states consumption isn't a problem, in some import isn't a problem, in some possession isn't a problem, and in some a particular age and variety of cow can be slaughtered, and in some, slaughter for specific purposes at specific times is alright. The states have passed these laws in view of the demographics and the interest of the demographics. Almost all of these laws, in their form and substances, have been appealed to the courts and upheld, except in 2017 in Tamil Nadu, where the Madras High Court had stayed the cow slaughter ban enactment, which, if you were to ask me, speaks for the independence of judiciary in these matters. Finally, the vigilantes of the Rakshaks. The vigilantes of the Rakshaks that have emerged from these enactments in the time of BJP is undoubtedly a problem that must be construed in light of the fact that the BJP is the world's largest political body with 60 million or 6 crore members. I did not hold back criticism for any variety of brass in the BJP when they've made wayward comments, but the fringes of such a large political body will have defected behavior. Having said that, it is important to note on several occasions, PM Modi, Amit Shah, and Rajnath Singh have come out heavily against vigilantism of any nature. Referring to it as Hindu or cow vigilantism takes the focus away from the true violation of law, vigilantism. If anything, I see it as a purposeful effort to avoid actively religious attributions and stave away from the pettiness of religious terminology, which only brings more pettiness and more allegations and possibly even more media distortion. However, can one do more for discouragement? Sure, I truly and abjectly condemn this variety of vigilantism as much as any other form of vigilantism. Do I find that the government could be harder on vigilantes and there is a better or a more efficient way to communicate that they don't support it? Sure, absolutely, 100%. On the other hand, do I find the media conflating the ban on caste slaughter, a constitutional right given to the state by the forefathers, with a restriction on Muslim culture, or a beef ban, or a saffron move entirely? Yes, I do. Which now finally brings me to my conclusions. Okay, on an ideological level, on an isolated analysis of RSS and BJP's idea of, let's just say, an inclusive definition of Hinduism, I find them absolutely not guilty of promoting any anti-Muslim rhetoric. In fact, Hinduism or Hindu was a term coined in the 19th century by English colonizers and did not exist before that. This is the prominent view of academicians and scholars, both Indian and foreigners, on Hinduism as a culture and religion. Google it. There is enough academic literature on that. So much so, the identity of Hinduism being a national cultural identity is philosophically uncontested for the most part. I have not found one valid piece of criticism of the theoretical aspect of BJP RSS philosophy anywhere. Not with the opposition, not with the scholars, and not with the media. What I have found from all three are opposition to their practice. So let us conclude the variety of aspects of their practice. Statistical research and communal violence. After the in-depth research that I fielded before you, it is safe to say that on 2 out of 3 accounts, no significant statistical difference is noted. The two trends, communal violence instances and injuries, move in either direction. One pro-BJP, one pro-INC, and yet the statistical insignificance allows me to discount it entirely. The common denominator in those two modalities is 0. The third, communal violence deaths, show a 20% decline since the BJP has come into power. That is a telling statistic. Whether that is attributable to a better rule of law, a better policing system, more fear of legal consequence, just shorter conflicts, or a use of less fatal tools of violence in these instances is an attribution I don't make. But the statistic I find works quite surprisingly and opposite to the media paranoia around communal lines for BJP. Comments. On count of the mid-tier brass leaders, a lot of the cases are found guilty of spreading falsehoods and delivering speeches that alienate the Muslim minority in India. On some cases, fewer yet present, media misconstruction can be seen as a number one reason that adds to the possible and compounding fear psychosis on communal lines. Added to that, the opposition and the population coming to quick conclusions on the basis of media distorted messages worsen the problem. Thirdly, after factoring in all possible varieties, all possible vertices of implicit support and encouragement, BJP is found guilty on giving tickets to the likes of Pragya Thakur or not condemning the likes of Menka Gandhi. Fourthly, there is no reasonable case to be made against any top brass to have instantiated a case of Muslim alienation, including the limited frivolous counts from NDTV's database. However, in Yogi Adityanath's case, I am inclined to call him guilty. Also take into consideration that Adityanath's instance is pre-2014. One possible caveat, purely from an academic and psychological position, is that negative evidence is far more capturable, salient, and incite more immediate response. Discrimination gets inflated in journalism and perception to accrue even hints of discrimination. On the contrary, positive evidence remains more hard to fixate on. Hence, appeasement is deflated to even exclude a few outright cases of appeasement too. However, even factoring that, there shall be a statistically significant anti-Muslim rhetoric from the middle brass. Policy. As far as my discussion illuminates, unless I have missed out on a policy, the idea of inclusive growth, an idea that purposely does not descend to use of religious terms in the mention of the subject of growth, seems pretty upheld in principle. In all three policy cases, there seems to be either progressivism and modernity in sync with the world, resonant support from Muslim leaders on issues where it appears prima facie that the law is anti-Muslim, or no case of anti-Muslim ideology in cases such as the ban on cow slaughter. Like I mentioned, the vigilante scenario is most definitely condemnable as abhorrent and malified, and the government could be seen as underactive or passive in handling that, at least to some degree. Final conclusions. At the cost of repetition, I maintain that there is an implicit responsibility of any and all right-wing governments, because they operate on socially majoritarian lines, often to be more than careful in issuing anti-minority remarks. On this charge, BJP needs to get its act together. In the same breath, it is more than necessary to mention that the opposition needs to not utilize fault lines between communities and instigate tensions for vote bank politics. In cases such as the advocacy for revocation of the triple talaq ban, Congress and Rahul Gandhi need to get their act together. Neither party is allowed to forget that the true pursuit is the betterment of the country, and that shall happen and be allowed to take place with or without them, as Atal Bihari Vajpayee once said. Finally, the media has definitely a role to play via means of sensationalism and partisanship on both sides, to create fear psychosis of minority hatred in India. Partisan media in either direction only fuels hates.